Welcome to Chapter 5 of The Bronze Kings, The Scholar's Resistance. In Chapter 4, we watch Siduri discover she's sterile, one of 17% of hybrids facing fertility challenges. We saw Talia deliver diagnoses for conditions no one had predicted. We learned Inara is with the Enochian Order, documenting hybrid suffering while providing support that institutions can't. The bridge population is crumbling. Intervention created populations that suffer from the help provided. But resistance isn't just suffering documented. Resistance is a developing philosophy that challenges biological determinism itself. This is Chapter 5, The Scholar's Resistance. 25 years old. Baseline human. Scholar. Aga argues, capability doesn't determine worth. Efficiency doesn't optimize justice. Equal voice matters despite unequal ability. Dignity requires recognition, not modification. 4 principles. Simple statements. Revolutionary implications. Sophia teaches him. The Immortal whose genetic modifications created enhancement now helps a baseline human develop a philosophy that resists everything enhancement represents. She's learning from her student that wisdom doesn't require processing speed. And beneath Uruk's temple, in chambers protected by quantum-stabilized passages, Damon encodes Aga's tablets, a former questioner who spent 30 years compiling evidence for exposure. Now Order member preserving evidence for revelation. Not condemnation but context. Not exposure but preparation. When humans eventually learn the complete truth, they'll need. Chapter 5, The Scholar's Resistance. Educational Facility, Uruk. 2850 BCE, 2 weeks after Chapter 4's hybrid crisis. The enhanced students had already solved the mathematics problem before Sophia finished writing it on the clay tablet. But Aga was still staring at the problem, and his question would prove more important than their answers. Sophia stood before her mixed class, 12 students, ages 18 to 30, 6 enhanced and 6 baseline. 52,000 years of teaching experience applied to the Bronze Age Mesopotamian education system, designed to prepare both populations for partnership governance. The classroom was modest, mud brick walls, reed mat floor, clay tablets and styluses for writing, oil lamps providing steady light. She'd just written a resource allocation problem. A city has 100 units of grain. The population includes 40 enhanced humans, each requiring 1 unit, and 60 baseline humans, each requiring 1.5 units. Optimal distribution? The enhanced students, Ninlil, Damir, Ishara, and 3 others, had processed the problem instantly, using simple mathematics. 40 enhanced units are needed. 60 baselines needed 90 units. The total requirement is 130 units, short by 30 units, requiring an allocation decision. Shortage requires prioritization, Ninlil said within seconds of Sophia finishing writing. Optimal distribution, full allocation to enhanced population, partial allocation to baseline. Enhanced humans contribute more to city productivity. Efficiency is maximized by maintaining enhanced capability at full function. The other enhanced students nodded. Obvious answer. Mathematically optimal. Enhanced processing had concluded before baseline students finished reading the problem. But Aga, 25, baseline, brilliant despite a processing speed that made him seem slow compared to enhanced peers, was still examining the problem rather than calculating. Questioning. Sophia had learned over 6,000 years of teaching to recognize the difference. Enhanced students optimized within given parameters and calculated the fastest path to the correct answer. Baseline students, particularly thoughtful ones like Aga, question parameters themselves. A different cognitive approach that the capability gap enabled rather than prevented. Aga? Sophia prompted. Your thoughts? The problem assumes optimization should determine distribution, Aga said carefully, his voice carrying the deliberate precision of someone who thought deeply before speaking. Enhanced students calculated the most efficient outcome. But should efficiency determine who eats? Ninlil looked impatient. It's mathematics. An objective answer exists. Enhanced humans contribute more productivity. Feeding us fully maintains that productivity. Feeding baseline partially still allows survival while preserving maximum city function. That's optimal. Optimal for city productivity, Aga agreed. But is city productivity the value we should optimize? What if we optimize for justice instead? For equal treatment of conscious beings regardless of capability differences? Then, the optimal distribution might be equal per capita, even if that reduces overall productivity. That's emotion disguised as ethics, Damon interjected, an enhanced mathematician who processed abstract concepts at speeds that made philosophical debate feel sluggish. You're uncomfortable with the outcome that disadvantages baseline humans. So you're questioning the framework to avoid accepting mathematical reality. That's not philosophy. That's motivated reasoning. Maybe, Aga said. Or maybe you're so focused on calculating optimal outcomes that you don't question whether optimization should determine distribution. Your cognition optimizes efficiently. My question is whether optimization serves justice. Different approaches. Both valuable. The classroom fell into brief silence, enhancing students' processing of Aga's challenge to their cognitive framework. Baseline students were watching to see whether questioning assumptions was permitted, even though enhanced students had already calculated answers. Sophia recognized the teaching moment she'd been cultivating for weeks. Aga raises an important distinction. Mathematics is objective about outcomes. Ethics is objective about principles. When they conflict, which takes priority? Enhanced students assume optimization wins. Aga questions that assumption. Both positions are logical. Both start from different premises about what governance should achieve. She wrote on a new tablet, Efficiency versus Justice, which determines legitimate distribution. This is the question partnership faces constantly, Sophia continued. Enhanced humans optimize better. That's measurable reality. But does superior optimization mean enhanced humans should determine distribution? Or does legitimate governance require input from all populations regardless of optimization capability? Ninlil responded immediately. If baseline humans can't calculate optimal outcomes, their input produces worse results. Governance that includes inferior processing produces inferior governance. That's not discrimination, that's mathematics. But governance legitimacy comes from consent, not optimization, Aga countered, his voice strengthening as he articulated intuition he'd been developing. Democracy isn't about governing optimally. It's about governing legitimately through the participation of all conscious beings affected by governance. Enhanced humans govern more efficiently. I agree. But efficiency doesn't create legitimacy. Consent creates legitimacy. Informed consent requires understanding, Ishar interjected, an enhanced student who specialized in probability theory. Baseline humans lack the cognitive capacity to evaluate complex governance questions that we can process fully. Your consent is less informed than ours. If legitimacy requires informed consent, enhanced humans provide more legitimate consent because we understand more. Aga paused, processing the counterargument. Sophia watched him struggle with logic that was valid from a capability perspective while feeling wrong from a dignity perspective. This was precisely the intellectual work. Baseline students needed to develop philosophical frameworks that defended their worth despite acknowledging enhanced superiority. Understanding depth and worth aren't the same thing, Aga finally said. Enhanced humans understand governance complexity better. But that doesn't make you worth more or your voice more legitimate. You're not more deserving of food because you calculate faster. You're not more deserving of representation because you process deeper. Capability and worth are separate questions. Prove it, Ninlil challenged. Show me a framework where capability doesn't determine outcomes, where being demonstrably superior at everything measurable doesn't translate into authority. You can't because reality doesn't work that way. Markets reward capability. Governance requires capability. Enhanced humans dominate because we're more capable. That's not injustice. That's nature. The class ended without resolution. Enhanced students departed efficiently, already moving on to the next task, satisfied they'd won the debate through superior logic. Baseline students left more slowly, several looking discouraged by enhanced intellectual dominance, others thoughtful about Aga's questioning. Aga remained, still examining the resource allocation problem on the tablet. Sophia approached. You challenged their assumptions well. They dismissed it as emotional thinking, Aga replied. Called it motivated reasoning. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm questioning optimization because I'm uncomfortable with outcomes that disadvantage baseline populations. Maybe, Sophia agreed. Or maybe enhanced students accept optimization without questioning because it advantages them. Their cognition is motivated too, toward maintaining systems that reward their capabilities. The difference is they don't recognize their motivation because it aligns with their cognitive framework. She settled beside him, 52,000 years old, teaching a 25-year-old human who was developing a philosophy that might matter for centuries. You asked a better question than they answered. They calculated the optimal outcome. You question whether optimization should determine distribution. Different intellectual approaches. Both are necessary for a partnership. But their answer determines outcomes, Aga said. Philosophy doesn't compete with mathematics in systems that reward calculation. Enhanced students are right that capability determines results. How do I defend baseline dignity when capability differences are real, and markets reward those differences? Sophia considered her response carefully. She'd been thinking about this since her confrontation with Siduri 2 weeks ago. Her daughter's exhaustion from the bridge role she'd been created to fulfill. The burden Sophia had imposed by having Siduri partly solve the problem rather than purely as a daughter. She'd failed Siduri by imposing purpose on her, by expecting her daughter to fulfill a mediation function that neither population valued naturally. By not fully considering what she was asking. With Aga, she would teach differently. Not to impose purpose. Not burden with solving the problem. Help him discover what he was seeking rather than directing him toward the right partnership. What do you want from this philosophy? Sophia asked. Not what I want. Not what baseline populations need. What do you personally need to understand or articulate? Aga looked surprised by the question. My family runs a textile business. Small operation. 3 generations building a reputation for quality work. Last year, an enhanced merchant offered to buy our business. Said he could optimize production, reduce costs, and increase output. My father refused. Prideful decision, maybe. But our business was his father's business. Meant something beyond efficiency. He paused, processing memory. Enhanced merchants set up competing operation and produced textiles that were adequate but cheaper. Our customers switched because they couldn't justify paying more for quality when adequate was accessible. We're losing customers despite superior craftsmanship. Enhanced efficiency is destroying our family legacy, not through better quality but through adequate quality at lower cost, enabled by superior processing speed. So your philosophy is personal, Sophia observed. Everything is personal eventually, Aga replied. Enhanced students in your class calculate problems abstractly. Don't see real families losing real businesses because capability differences translate to market dominance. I'm not questioning optimization because I'm emotional. I'm questioning it because I'm watching my father lose his life's work to a merchant who's more efficient but not more ethical. Not more creative. Not more committed. Just faster. And you want a philosophical framework that defends your father's worth despite enhanced efficiency? Sophia asked. I want a framework that separates capability from worth, Aga said. That acknowledges enhanced humans are more capable at almost everything measurable, while arguing that capability doesn't determine value. That my father's textile business matters even if it's not optimal. That baseline humans deserve dignity despite losing economic competition to enhanced processing speed. Sophia felt recognition of what she'd missed with Siduri. Aga wanted this philosophy. Needed it personally. Wasn't being imposed a burden but seeking tools to articulate the intuition he already felt. Students succeeded when they wanted what teachers offered, not when teachers imposed purposes students hadn't chosen. Then let's develop that framework, Sophia said. Not because the partnership needs it. If it happens to provide baseline populations with the intellectual tools to resist consolidation, that's a consequence rather than a purpose. Your philosophy first. Utility second. Where do we start? Aga asked. With the question enhanced, students keep avoiding, Sophia replied. Does capability determine worth? They assume yes without examining the assumption. You're questioning it. Let's make that question rigorous. Let's build a philosophical framework that defends dignity despite differences in capabilities. That acknowledges enhanced superiority while arguing superiority doesn't justify hierarchy. Sophia's residence, Uruk. Evening, same day. They settled into Sophia's central room, a space designed for teaching across millennia, now hosting the development of philosophy that might resist consolidation, her own intervention having enabled. Oil lamps cast steady light. Clay tablets and writing tools lay out. Read screens filter the evening air. Start with what you know, enhanced students will argue, Sophia suggested. Build a framework that anticipates their counterarguments rather than ignoring them. Aga thought carefully. They'll argue that if consciousness determines worth, enhanced consciousness is superior. More complex processing. Deeper pattern recognition. Richer cognitive experience. So even a consciousness-based framework favors enhanced humans. Valid counterargument, Sophia acknowledged. How do you respond? Consciousness isn't scalar, Aga said slowly, thinking through logic. It's not more or less. It's presence or absence. Enhanced humans process faster. But both enhanced and baseline are conscious. Think. Feel. Choose. Experience. Are aware. That fundamental status, being conscious rather than unconscious, is what creates worth. Processing speed differences don't change the fundamental category of conscious being deserving dignity. Sophia wrote it on a tablet. Consciousness is categorical, not scalar. Worth comes from being conscious, not from the degree of consciousness. They'll argue that's an arbitrary distinction, Sophia said, playing an enhanced role. That you're defining consciousness in a way that advantages your position. That if consciousness exists on a spectrum from simple to complex, more complex consciousness has more worth. Then I argue worth isn't tied to consciousness degree but to consciousness presence, Aga countered. That all conscious beings have equal worth regardless of processing complexity because worth comes from experiencing existence, not from experiencing it optimally. Your cognitive richness doesn't make your experience more valuable than mine. Just different. Different, Sophia repeated. That's key word. Not inferior. Different. Enhanced students keep conflating different with inferior because, in measurable outcomes, different produces worse results. You're arguing that different experiences have equal worth even when different capabilities produce unequal outcomes. Yes, Aga said with growing confidence. Enhanced humans optimize. Baseline humans experience differently. Question differently. Innovate differently. Provide perspectives that capability can't access because optimal processing accepts frameworks rather than questioning them. Different cognitive approaches. Both valuable. Neither superior. Sophia wrote. Different cognitive approaches equals different strengths, not a superior/inferior hierarchy. They'll say that's measurably false, she continued, maintaining an enhanced intellectual position. That enhanced humans dominate every measurable domain: commerce, governance, engineering, mathematics, philosophy. If baseline humans have different strengths, show evidence. They'll demand proof that different products produce equivalent value. Aga struggled with this. I can't prove equivalent value in measurable outcomes. Enhanced humans do dominate measurably. But. He paused, reaching for a distinction he sensed but couldn't articulate. Sophia waited. Teaching was often about letting students discover rather than directing. But measurement itself is an enhanced framework, Aga finally said. Enhanced cognition values optimization. Enhanced humans measure success using optimization metrics. Commerce, efficiency. Governance, optimal outcomes. Engineering, maximum function. Mathematics, correct answers. Those measurements inherently favor enhanced capabilities. Baseline humans might excel in domains enhanced cognition doesn't measure because it doesn't value them. Like what? Sophia prompted. Innovation through questioning rather than optimization. Resilience through different problem-solving approaches. Perspective from experiencing limitations that enhanced processing doesn't face. Creativity from cognitive constraints that force novel solutions. These might not measure well on enhanced metrics but still provide value. Sophia wrote. Measurement systems reflect enhanced values. Unmeasured contributions still matter. Careful, she cautioned. This argument can sound like special pleading. We're valuable in unmeasurable ways feels like an excuse for measurable inferiority. You need a stronger framework. Aga nodded, recognizing the weakness. Then I separate capability from legitimacy. Enhanced humans are more capable. I acknowledge that. But democratic legitimacy doesn't come from capability. It comes from consent. From the participation of all conscious beings affected by governance. Enhanced humans govern more efficiently. That's true. But efficiency doesn't create legitimacy. Representation creates legitimacy. They'll counter that informed consent requires understanding, Sophia said. That baseline humans can't provide informed consent to complex decisions they can't fully process. That enhanced consent is more legitimate because it's more informed. Then I argue that perfect understanding isn't required for legitimate consent, Aga responded, his philosophy crystallizing through the dialectic process. That baseline humans understand enough to provide meaningful consent, even if enhanced humans understand more. That legitimate governance requires participation from all affected populations, not optimal processing from the superior population. That democracy is about serving everyone, not about optimal decisions. Sophia felt recognition of teaching success. Aga was developing a framework that acknowledged enhanced superiority while defending baseline dignity, avoiding denial of reality, and reframing what reality meant for worth and legitimacy. They'll say that's idealistic fantasy, Sophia warned. That reality doesn't care about dignity claims. That markets reward capability regardless of philosophical arguments. That enhanced dominance is inevitable regardless of what baseline humans believe about their worth. And they're right, Aga said. Philosophy won't change economic reality. It won't prevent enhanced humans from dominating commerce through superior processing. Won't stop consolidation that's already happening. But philosophy provides baseline populations with reason to resist. With a framework for demanding political equality despite economic inequality. With language for maintaining dignity despite capability differences. He met Sophia's eyes. Philosophy isn't a solution. It's a resistance tool. An intellectual framework that transforms resentment into principle. That gives baseline populations language to organize around rather than just experiencing marginalization. Enhanced students dismiss it as emotional comfort. Let them. It's not for them. It's for us. Sophia wrote. Baseline dignity philosophy equals organizing framework, not solution. What are your core principles? Sophia asked. Distill it to essential arguments. Aga considered. 4 main principles. First, consciousness determines worth, not capability. Enhanced humans process information faster, but both populations are conscious beings who think, feel, choose, and experience. That fundamental status creates equal worth regardless of processing differences. Second, democracy requires representation, not optimization. Legitimate governance comes from the consent of all affected populations, not from optimal decisions by a superior population. Enhanced humans govern more efficiently, but efficiency doesn't create legitimacy. Third, optimization isn't wisdom. Enhanced humans optimize within values. Baseline humans question whether values should be optimized. Wisdom is interrogating frameworks, not just processing within them. Both are necessary for governance. Fourth, different strengths matter. Enhanced humans calculate better. Baseline humans question differently, innovate differently, and provide perspectives that optimal processing can't access. Partnership needs both approaches. Sophia documented all 4 principles on clay tablets. This is a framework that the baseline population can use. Acknowledges enhanced superiority at measurable capabilities while defending baseline dignity through consciousness, legitimacy, wisdom, and difference. Not denying reality. Reframing it. Will it work? Aga asked. Define work, Sophia replied. Will it prevent consolidation? No. Enhanced humans dominate through capability regardless of philosophy. Will it convince enhanced humans that capability doesn't justify hierarchy? Unlikely. They benefit from systems that reward their advantages. Will it provide baseline populations with intellectual tools for resistance? Yes. Will it transform scattered resentment into an organized principle? Potentially. Will it give baseline humans language to maintain dignity even if they lose economically? That's its purpose. She looked at Aga directly. You asked where to start. This is the start. Philosophy that acknowledges reality while reframing meaning. That separates capability from worth. That defends baseline dignity without denying enhanced superiority. The question now is how to teach it. How to spread the framework so other baseline humans can use it. I want to present it to the baseline community, Aga said. See if it resonates. If it provides others with the language they need. And you need to be prepared for enhanced response, Sophia added. They'll dismiss it. Call it emotional comfort. Argue it's self-serving fiction. Your philosophy has to be strong enough to survive dismissal. Has to provide baseline humans with a framework they believe even when enhanced humans don't. Will you help me refine it? Aga asked. Sophia thought about Siduri. About imposing a bridge function on a daughter who hadn't chosen the mediation role. About the burden created through instrumental purpose rather than pure love. About the failure that came from making the child into a solution. Aga wasn't her child. Was her student. Wanted what she was offering. Philosophy was his choice, not her imposition. She could help without burdening. Could teach without instrumentalizing. Could guide without controlling purpose. Yes, Sophia said. I'll help you develop the baseline dignity philosophy. Not because the partnership needs it. Because you need it. Because your father's textile business deserves philosophical defense. Because baseline humans need language to maintain worth despite capability differences. Because ideas matter even when they don't prevent what they resist. They work through the evening, refining principles, anticipating counterarguments, and developing accessible language for abstract concepts. Sophia teaches with 52,000 years of experience, applied to students who want to learn rather than to those burdened by purpose. This was how teaching should work, students seeking tools. The teacher is providing them. Philosophy develops organically rather than being imposed as a solution to problems immortals created. Aga departed near midnight, carrying clay tablets with principles he'd developed through dialectic process with Sophia's guidance. Tomorrow, he would refine further. Next week, he would present to the baseline community. Eventually, philosophy might spread through baseline intellectual networks, providing a framework for resistance that capability couldn't provide. Sophia sat alone in her teaching space, thinking about success and failure. Success with Aga. Failure with Siduri. Both teaching her that imposing purpose created a burden while offering tools enabled choice. She'd have a hybrid daughter, partly to solve the problem. Had created the mediation function. Siduri hadn't chosen it and had failed as a mother by instrumentalizing it as a solution. With Aga, she taught differently and helped him articulate what he already sought, providing the tools he requested rather than the burden he hadn't chosen and letting philosophy develop from his needs rather than directing toward partnership requirements. Limited victory. Philosophy wouldn't prevent consolidation. It wouldn't convince enhanced humans. Wouldn't change economic reality. But it would provide baseline populations with a resistance framework. With language for dignity. With principles for organizing. In an immortal timescale, that mattered. Ideas planted in 2850 BCE would grow across decades, centuries, and millennia. Baseline dignity philosophy might not prevent immediate consolidation, but would shape how baseline populations understood their resistance across generations. Seeds for later. Not a solution for now. Teaching approach aligned with the immortal perspective, measuring impact across centuries rather than years. Sophia extinguished lamps, preparing for rest. Tomorrow, she would continue teaching a mixed class. Would watch enhanced students optimize. Would watch Aga question. Would guide without imposing. Would teach without instrumentalizing. Learning from failure. Growing through recognition of mistakes. Understanding that successful teaching requires respecting student autonomy rather than directing toward predetermined purposes. 52,000 years old. Still learning. Baseline community meeting space, Uruk. 3 days later. Aga stood before 50 baseline humans who gathered to hear what he was calling a philosophical framework for dignity despite capability differences. The space was a modest, communal building that baseline populations maintained collectively, a neutral territory where neither enhanced nor immortal authority dominated. 50 people. Merchants, craftspeople, farmers, laborers, administrators. Ages ranging from 18 to 58. All baseline. All are experiencing marginalization despite partnership institutions designed to protect them. All were potentially receptive to philosophy that defended their worth. Or all were potentially skeptical of philosophy that couldn't change the economic reality they faced daily. Heron was present, the merchant whose son had asked about following his father's trade. 51 years old. 30 years of watching enhanced merchants dominate commerce. Skeptical of ideas without practical application. But present. Listening. Potentially persuadable that the dignity framework mattered even if it didn't change markets. Aga had prepared carefully, refining principles through a week of work with Sophia's guidance. Now came the test. Would the baseline community embrace philosophy? Or dismiss it as impractical idealism that acknowledged problems without solving them? Enhanced humans are more capable than we are, Aga began without preamble. I'm starting with that because denying it is a fantasy. Enhanced merchants process trade networks faster. Enhanced administrators calculate governance better. Enhanced engineers optimize infrastructure more efficiently. Markets reward these capabilities. The result is enhanced humans dominating commerce, accumulating wealth, and consolidating power. This is a biological reality. This is what we face. Several audience members nodded, acknowledging rather than denying enhanced superiority. Unusual approach for baseline gathering. But capability doesn't determine worth, Aga continued. That's what I'm here to argue. Enhanced humans are more capable. I agree. But being more capable doesn't make them worth more as beings. Doesn't make their lives more valuable. Doesn't make their voices more legitimate in governance. Capability and worth are separate questions. Sounds like wishful thinking, someone called from back. Market doesn't care about worth. Cares about capability. Enhanced humans win because they're better. Better at optimization, Aga agreed. Not better as beings. Difference matters. Enhanced humans optimize faster. That gives them an economic advantage. Doesn't give them moral superiority. Doesn't make them more deserving of dignity. Doesn't mean governance should serve them preferentially. He gestured to the clay tablet bearing the first principle. Consciousness determines worth, not capability. Enhanced humans process information faster than we do. Their cognition is more complex. Their pattern recognition is superior. Their memory is better. All true. But both enhanced and baseline humans are conscious beings. We think, feel, choose, experience. We are aware of our existence. That fundamental status, being conscious rather than not conscious, is what creates worth. Processing speed differences don't change the fundamental category of conscious being deserving dignity. They'd argue their consciousness is superior, Heron interjected. More complex thinking. Deeper experience. Richer awareness. If consciousness determines worth, their consciousness is worth more. They'll argue that, Aga acknowledged. I'm not here to convince enhanced humans. I'm here to provide you with a framework that defends your dignity. Consciousness isn't more or less. It's present or absent. Enhanced humans process faster. We process more slowly. But both populations experience existence. Think about our lives. Feel emotions. Make choices. Are aware. That commonality, conscious experience creates equal worth regardless of processing differences. He moved to the second principle. Democracy requires representation, not optimization. This is critical. Enhanced humans govern more efficiently. That's a measurable fact. They calculate better policies. Process complex situations faster. Coordinate systems more effectively. If governance is about optimal outcomes, enhanced humans should govern exclusively. But governance isn't about optimization. It's about legitimacy through consent. Democracy means participation of all affected populations, not optimal decisions by a superior population. But if we can't process complex governance questions they understand, how is our consent meaningful? A younger baseline man asked. They understand more. Our consent is less informed. Perfect understanding isn't required for legitimate consent, Aga replied. We understand enough to make meaningful choices about governance, even if enhanced humans understand more. Legitimacy comes from participation, not from optimal processing. Partnership institutions protect our voting rights because legitimate governance requires our consent. Even if our consent is less informed than enhanced consent, it's still necessary for legitimacy. He saw some nods. Some skepticism. Philosophy resonates with some but is considered impractical by others. Third principle, optimization isn't wisdom, Aga continued. Enhanced humans are optimizers. They process efficiently within given frameworks. Calculate the best solutions within established values. We question frameworks themselves. Ask whether the values being optimized should be optimized. Different cognitive approaches. Enhanced students in Sophia's class solve problems instantly. I question whether problems are reframed correctly. Not better or worse. Different. Both are necessary for good governance. That sounds like special pleading, Heron said, not hostile but challenging. Claiming we're valuable in unmeasurable ways because we're measurably inferior. Maybe, Aga admitted. Or maybe measurement systems reflect enhanced values. They measure efficiency because they value optimization. Baseline contributions might lie in domains their metrics don't capture. Questioning assumptions they accept. Providing perspectives on their processing speed overlooks. Innovation through constraints they don't face. These might not measure well, but still provide value. He moved to the final principle. Fourth, different strengths matter. Enhanced humans calculate trade routes better. Optimize resource allocation more efficiently. Coordinate complex systems faster. These are real advantages producing absolute dominance. But baseline humans think differently. Question differently. Innovate through different approaches. Partnership needs both optimization and questioning. Both enhanced calculation and baseline interrogation. Different isn't inferior when different provides capabilities optimization lacks. The audience sat with these principles. Some inspired, finally, a framework defending dignity they'd been seeking. Some skeptical philosophy that acknowledged problems without solving them. Some practical ideas that didn't change the markets they faced. I appreciate the framework, Heron finally said. But enhanced merchants still control 73% of the bronze trade. Baseline dignity philosophy doesn't compete with processing speed in markets that reward capability. How does your philosophy change economic reality I'm losing to? Aga had expected this question and had discussed it with Sophia. It doesn't change markets. Doesn't prevent enhanced dominance. Doesn't solve economic consolidation. Philosophy provides you with language to interpret what's happening. Framework that says, enhanced humans dominate commerce through superior capability, and baseline humans deserve political equality despite economic inequality. Enhanced efficiency doesn't justify enhanced hierarchy. You can acknowledge commercial failure while demanding political representation. So it's comfort without solution? Heron pressed. It's a principle without power, Aga replied. You're losing economically. That's reality. Philosophy can't change it. But you can maintain dignity despite losing. Can demand justice despite capability differences. Can organize resistance around a principle rather than just experiencing resentment. Philosophy transforms scattered marginalization into principled resistance. That's its purpose. And you think enhanced humans will care about our principled resistance? Someone asked. No, Aga said honestly. Enhanced humans will dismiss this philosophy. Call it emotional comfort. Argue that capability determines outcomes regardless of dignity claims. They'll be right that philosophy doesn't change economic reality. But philosophy isn't for them. It's for us. Provides us with a framework we believe even when they don't. Language for organizing. Principles for resisting. Dignity despite losing. The gathering continued for 2 hours. Baseline humans asking questions, challenging premises, and testing the framework against practical concerns they faced. Aga responds, refining arguments, acknowledging limitations while defending philosophy's utility as an organizing tool. Some embraced baseline dignity principles. Found the language they'd been seeking. Philosophical defense of worth despite capability gaps. A framework that acknowledged reality while reframing meaning. Some remained skeptical. Questioned whether philosophy mattered when markets determined outcomes. Worried that dignity claims without power were self-deception. Some saw practical value. Recognized that organized resistance required shared principles. That philosophy provided baseline populations with language to unite around rather than just experiencing scattered marginalization. As the gathering concluded, several baseline humans approached Aga, asking for copies of the principles, wanting to discuss further, and requesting that he teach in their communities. Philosophy was spreading through baseline intellectual networks before enhanced humans had even noticed its development. Heron approached last. You're right that philosophy doesn't change markets. But it changes how we interpret our position in those markets. Gives us language to demand political equality while acknowledging economic inequality. That's worth something. Not enough. But something. Aga felt validation combined with recognition of limitations. Philosophy resonates with baseline audiences, providing the framework they needed, but not solving the problems it addressed or preventing consolidation it resisted. Seeds for later. Not a solution for now. Ideas that would matter across decades and centuries, even if they didn't change immediate reality. He walked back through Uruk's streets, thinking about his father's textile business. About an enhanced merchant dominating through efficiency rather than quality. About family legacy losing to optimization that didn't value craftsmanship. Philosophy wouldn't save his father's business. Wouldn't change the economic reality that enhanced efficiency outcompeted baseline quality. But provided a framework that said market outcomes didn't determine his father's worth. His family's dignity wasn't measured by commercial success. Enhanced dominance didn't make enhanced humans better as beings. Limited victory. But victory nonetheless. Tomorrow, he would refine philosophy further. Would prepare for enhanced dismissal that would surely come once they noticed baseline intellectual resistance to organizing. Would develop arguments strong enough to survive critique from cognitive superiority that would attack every premise. Philosophy developing. Resistance framework emerging. Baseline dignity is taking shape as an organizing principle that acknowledges reality while defending worth despite differences in capability. The ideas were planted. Now came growth across time, measured in centuries by immortals while humans experienced it in years. 5 days after Aga's baseline presentation, word had spread through Uruk's intellectual networks with the efficiency that enhanced cognition enabled. Baseline scholar developing a philosophical framework defending dignity despite capability differences. Calling it baseline dignity philosophy. Presenting to baseline communities and creating intellectual resistance to consolidation that humans viewed as inevitable. Enkidu had called a gathering of enhanced intellectuals to address what he considered a philosophical curiosity worth examining before dismissing. 12 enhanced scholars assembled in the evening, mathematicians, administrators, philosophers, and engineers. Ages ranging from 30 to 60. All enhanced. All are accustomed to intellectual dominance. All prepared to systematically dismantle arguments from baseline scholar who couldn't match their processing speed. The gathering space was Enkidu's residence, larger than Aga's family home, reflecting wealth accumulated through enhanced advantages. Oil lamps provide steady light, clay tablets documenting Aga's 4 principles, obtained through an enhanced network that tracked baseline intellectual activity. Dates and wine rather than water, enhanced metabolism, processing alcohol efficiently without the impairment that baseline humans would experience. Ishara opened the discussion, an enhanced mathematician who challenged Aga in Sophia's classroom. Baseline scholar argues consciousness determines worth, not capability. Claims enhanced and baseline are both conscious, therefore, they are equally valuable despite processing differences. The first principle is foundational to his entire framework. If it fails, everything else collapses. It fails, said Damir, an enhanced philosopher who specialized in ethics. Consciousness exists on a spectrum from simple to complex. Insects are conscious at a basic level. Humans are conscious at a more complex level. Enhanced humans are conscious at an even more complex level than baseline. If consciousness determines worth, a more complex consciousness has more worth. His argument undermines itself. He'd counter that consciousness is categorical, not scalar, Enkidu said, having studied Aga's presentations carefully. That presence of consciousness matters, not degree. Both enhanced and baseline are conscious beings who think, feel, choose, and experience. That fundamental commonality creates equal worth regardless of processing complexity. That's an arbitrary distinction, Damir replied. Defining consciousness in a way that advantages his position. If we accept that the degree of consciousness doesn't matter, why stop at humans? Animals are conscious. Should they have equal representation? Plants respond to the environment. Should they vote? He's drawing a line at human consciousness because it serves his argument, not because the line has philosophical justification. More fundamentally, Ishara added, his framework assumes worth exists independently of capability. But worth is meaningless without reference to function. Beings are worthy insofar as they contribute value. Enhanced humans contribute more value through superior capability. Therefore, enhanced humans have more worth. Simple logic he's trying to complicate through emotional appeals. Ninlil spoke next, an enhanced engineer who optimized infrastructure systems. His second principle, democracy requires representation, not optimization. Claims legitimate governance comes from consent, not capability. But this ignores that informed consent requires understanding. Humans lack the cognitive capacity to evaluate complex governance questions, which we process instantly. Their consent is less informed. If legitimacy requires informed consent, our consent is more legitimate because we understand more. And requiring less informed consent produces worse governance, added the enhanced administrator. Partnership includes baseline representation. The result is slower decision-making, suboptimal policies, and reduced efficiency. We're accepting governance costs to preserve the principle that baseline scholar claims create legitimacy. But legitimacy that produces worse outcomes isn't valuable. It's self-defeating. Enkidu processed the arguments while considering Aga's framework more carefully than his fellow enhanced intellectuals seemed willing to do. He's not arguing baseline consent produces better outcomes. He's arguing that legitimacy comes from participation regardless of optimization. That governance serving everyone requires everyone's input, even if that input is less informed than ours. Why? Damir challenged. If our governance is demonstrably better for everyone, including baseline populations, why does legitimacy require their less informed participation? We're serving their interests more effectively than they could serve themselves. That's not tyranny. That's competent governance. Because they might not agree with our assessment of their interests, Enkidu said, articulating Aga's position despite personally questioning it. Baseline humans might value different outcomes than we optimize for. Our superior processing aligns with our values. They're questioning whether our values should determine their governance. Then they're wrong, Ninlil said flatly. Some values are objectively better. Efficiency is better than inefficiency. Optimal outcomes are better than suboptimal ones. Enhanced values produce superior results. That's measurable reality, not preference. His third principle addresses this, Enkidu continued, reading from a tablet. Optimization isn't wisdom. Claims enhanced humans optimize within values, while baseline humans question whether values should be optimized. Argues that both are necessary for governance. That's a false distinction, Ishara said. Enhanced humans question values and optimize. We're better at both. His claim that baseline humans provide unique value through questioning is unsupported. Please show me a domain where baseline questioning produces insights, enhanced processing doesn't. Can't. Because it doesn't exist, we question more deeply because we process more thoroughly. We might question within frameworks we construct efficiently, Enkidu suggested, playing opposition despite his own skepticism. Baseline cognitive constraints might force different approaches that reveal assumptions our optimization accepts. Different processing might produce different perspectives. Different perspectives that are inferior, Damir countered. Different isn't valuable when different means worse. Baseline unique perspectives is polite fiction masking cognitive inferiority. If their perspectives were valuable, they dominate some measurable domain. They don't. Enhanced humans excel across every dimension. Evidence contradicts his claim. The gathering moved to the fourth principle. Different strengths matter. Aga's argument that the enhanced and baseline contributed different valuable capabilities. This is the weakest principle, Ninlil said. Claims baseline humans have different strengths. What strengths? Enhanced humans dominate commerce, governance, engineering, mathematics, philosophy, military strategy, infrastructure design, and resource management. Every measurable domain. His different strengths argument requires evidence he can't provide because baseline humans are measurably inferior across all dimensions. Maybe measurement itself reflects enhanced values, Enkidu said, continuing to articulate Aga's framework. We measure optimization because our cognition values efficiency. Baseline contributions might exist in domains our metrics don't capture. Like what? Ishara demanded. Name one domain where baseline humans excel that we don't measure. One capability they possess that we lack. Can't. Because it doesn't exist, his argument is unfalsifiable. Claims baseline humans are valuable in unmeasurable ways. That's not philosophy. That's faith. Enkidu felt the systematic dismantling of Aga's framework proceeding exactly as expected. Enhanced cognitive superiority applied to philosophical debate. Every principle challenged. Every argument countered. Baseline dignity philosophy has been reduced to emotional comfort rather than a rigorous philosophy. And yet, something about the dismissal felt incomplete. Not wrong, precisely. But missing what made Aga's philosophy matter to baseline populations, regardless of enhanced critique. We're approaching this as a philosophical debate to win, Enkidu said slowly. Treating baseline dignity as an argument to refute. But Aga isn't trying to convince us. He's providing baseline populations with the framework they need. Our dismissal doesn't invalidate his philosophy for his audience. Then his philosophy is propaganda, Damir said. Self-serving fiction that baseline humans believe because it comforts them. That's not philosophy. That's emotional manipulation. Or it's an organizing tool, Enkidu replied. Framework that transforms scattered baseline resentment into principled resistance. Language they can unite around, principles for demanding justice despite capability differences. We're dismissing it as bad philosophy. They're embracing it as good politics. Should we be concerned? Nilal asked. Baseline populations organizing around dignity principles? No, Ishara said confidently. Philosophy doesn't change economic reality. Markets still reward capability. Enhanced humans will continue dominating commerce regardless of baseline dignity claims. Organized resistance without power is just organized complaint. Let them believe their worth isn't determined by capability. Reality will teach them otherwise through market outcomes. Agreed, Damir added. Baseline dignity philosophy is sophisticated self-deception. Acknowledges enhanced superiority while denying that superiority justifies hierarchy. Logical contradiction they're maintaining through emotional commitment to equality that reality doesn't support. We don't need to counter it philosophically. Markets already counter it economically. Reality is a better rebuttal than an argument. The gathering reached consensus that the baseline dignity philosophy was intellectually weak, emotionally motivated, and practically irrelevant. Enhanced humans would continue consolidating power through capability. Baseline resistance organized around dignity principles would fail because philosophy couldn't overcome the biological reality that determined economic outcomes, which in turn determined political influence. Enkidu felt the confidence in the room. Enhanced intellectuals were sure their dismissal was valid. Baseline philosophy was comfort without substance. Resistance without power. Principles that couldn't prevent consolidation regardless of how many baseline humans embraced them. And they were probably right. But Enkidu thought about Nix's probability calculations. 87% consolidation probability. Baseline resistance is one variable that might shift outcomes toward or away from that trajectory. Philosophy that united baseline populations around shared principles rather than scattered resentments could make resistance more effective. More organized. Harder to dismiss as simple jealousy. Not enough to prevent consolidation. But perhaps enough to make consolidation more difficult. More contested. Less inevitable than enhanced humans assumed. We should monitor baseline intellectual networks, Enkidu suggested. Track whether Aga's philosophy spreads. Whether it organizes resistance more effectively than resentment alone would. Not because it threatens us philosophically. Because organized resistance is different from disorganized complaint. Monitor if you want, Ishara said dismissively. Won't change outcomes. Enhanced capability determines hierarchy regardless of baseline philosophy. Reality doesn't negotiate with dignity claims. The gathering concluded with enhanced intellectuals satisfied they'd systematically dismantled baseline dignity philosophy. Confident that capability would determine outcomes regardless of what baseline humans believed about their worth. Particularly, that consolidation would proceed because biology and markets were more powerful than ideas. Enkidu departed, thinking about the conversation. Enhanced dismissal was logically sound. Philosophically rigorous. Economically realistic. Everything they'd argued was probably correct. But something about their certainty felt dangerous, like optimizers who'd calculated the correct answer without questioning whether they'd framed the problem correctly. Like superior processors, they were missing the perspective that cognitive advantage prevented them from accessing. Maybe Aga was right that enhanced humans optimized without questioning. That baseline humans provided value through interrogating frameworks rather than processing within them. That different cognitive approaches both mattered, even when one produced measurably superior outcomes. Or maybe Enkidu was overthinking and seeing complexity where a simple capability hierarchy existed. Enhanced humans were superior. Baseline philosophy wouldn't change that. Consolidation would proceed regardless of the baseline populations embraced. Probably. Sophia's residence, Uruk. Next evening. Aga arrived looking discouraged. Enhanced intellectuals dismissed the philosophy. Word spread through their networks faster than through ours. They systematically dismantled every principle. Called it emotional comfort. Said it was self-serving fiction. Argued that reality doesn't care about dignity claims. Sophia had expected this and had prepared Aga for dismissal during their tutorial sessions. But expecting critique and experiencing it were different. Enhanced intellectual superiority applied to destroying baseline philosophy felt different from anticipating that destruction. Tell me their arguments, Sophia said. Aga recounted the enhanced critique. Consciousness exists on a spectrum, a more complex consciousness has more worth. Informed consent requires understanding, enhanced consent is more legitimate. Enhanced humans question values and optimize better. Different strengths are unsupported by evidence across all measurable domains. Philosophy is organized self-deception. All valid arguments from a capability perspective, Sophia acknowledged. Enhanced intellectuals are right that your philosophy doesn't prove baseline equality through their measurement systems. Right, that markets reward capability regardless of dignity claims. Right, that consolidation will proceed because biology determines economic outcomes. So they're correct? Aga asked, discouraged. They're correct about what philosophy doesn't do, Sophia replied. Doesn't prove baseline equality by enhanced metrics. Doesn't prevent economic consolidation. Doesn't convince enhanced humans that capability shouldn't determine hierarchy. You knew this going in. Why does their dismissal discourage you now? Because I hoped philosophical rigor would convince them, Aga admitted. That logic would transcend capability differences. That even enhanced intellectuals would have to acknowledge dignity principles despite their advantages. I was naive. You were idealistic, Sophia corrected. Different from naive. You hoped philosophy could bridge populations. Those ideas could overcome biology. Noble hope. Also wrong. Enhanced humans benefit from systems' ability to reward. They'll dismiss any philosophy that questions the capability-based hierarchy, regardless of philosophical rigor. Not because your philosophy is weak. Because accepting it would undermine their advantages. She settled beside him, the teacher helping the student process the hard truth. Remember what I told you during tutorials. Your philosophy isn't for enhanced humans. It's for baseline humans. Enhanced dismissal doesn't invalidate the framework if baseline populations find it valuable. What matters isn't whether enhanced intellectuals accept your philosophy. What matters is whether baseline communities use it. And are they? Aga asked. You presented 5 days ago, Sophia replied. Already requests from 3 other baseline communities for you to teach. Copies of your principles are circulating through baseline intellectual networks. Merchants cite the dignity framework when discussing economic consolidation. Craftspeople using your language about consciousness determining worth. 5 days. Philosophy is spreading faster than I expected. But enhanced humans are right that philosophy doesn't change economic reality, Aga said. My father's business is still losing to enhanced competition. Baseline merchants still control only 27% of trade. Philosophy provides comfort but doesn't provide solutions. Philosophy provides a framework, Sophia corrected. Language for interpreting reality. Principles for organizing resistance. Baseline merchants acknowledge economic failure and demand political equality. Those are both possible because your philosophy separates capability from worth. Acknowledges enhanced superiority and defends baseline dignity. Framework that makes both true simultaneously. Enhanced intellectuals called that logical contradiction, Aga noted. From their perspective, it is, Sophia agreed. They conflate capability with worth. Can't separate being superior at processing from being superior as beings. Your philosophy makes a distinction that they can't accept because accepting it would undermine the hierarchies they benefit from. But baseline populations can hold both truths. Enhanced humans are more capable, and capability doesn't determine worth. Not contradiction. Different framework. Aga processed this. So success isn't convincing enhanced humans. Success is providing baseline humans with the language they need. Exactly, Sophia confirmed. Enhanced intellectuals dismissed your philosophy as emotional comfort. Let them. It is comfort. Comfort that acknowledges reality while maintaining dignity despite that reality. Baseline humans need that comfort. Need a framework saying, you're losing economically and you matter as beings. Both true. Philosophy makes both possible. How do I refine the framework? Aga asked. Enhanced critique revealed weaknesses. Arguments I can't fully defend. How do I strengthen philosophy against intellectual attack? You don't, Sophia said. Not for an enhanced audience. You strengthen it for the baseline audience. Make principles more accessible. Develop examples that resonate with baseline experiences. Create language that baseline communities can use without requiring philosophical sophistication. Enhanced intellectuals will always find weaknesses because they measure by standards your philosophy rejects. Doesn't matter. Your audience is baseline humans who need dignity defense, not enhanced humans who need to be convinced. She retrieved clay tablets from earlier tutorials. Look at your 4 principles. Consciousness determines worth. Democracy requires representation. Optimization isn't wisdom. Different strengths matter. These are accessible ideas. Humans without philosophical training understand them. That's their strength. Not philosophical rigor that satisfies enhanced intellectuals. Practical utility that serves baseline needs. So I'm a teacher, not a philosopher? Aga asked. You're both, Sophia replied. Philosopher developing framework. The teacher spreads it to communities that need it. Your philosophy won't win academic debates against intellectual elites. Will win baseline hearts by providing the language they're seeking. Different measures of success. Enhanced intellectuals are measured by logical rigor. Baseline communities are measured by practical utility. You're succeeding by second measure even while failing by first. Limited victory, Aga said, echoing a phrase Sophia had used during tutorials. Yes, Sophia agreed. Philosophy that won't prevent consolidation. Won't convince enhanced humans. It won't change economic reality. But it will provide baseline populations with a resistance framework. With principles for maintaining dignity. With language for organizing around. Limited victory that might matter across decades and centuries, even if it doesn't change immediate outcomes. Immortal perspective, Aga observed. Yes, Sophia said. Ideas planted now grow across time that immortals measure in centuries while humans experience in years. Your philosophy might not change the consolidation trajectory in your lifetime. But baseline population citing your principles 50 years from now, 100, 500, that's victory by immortal standards. Seeds for later. Not solutions for now. Aga sat with this recognition. I wanted immediate impact. Wanted enhanced intellectuals convinced. Wanted philosophy that changed reality rather than just interpreting it. Marx wanted that too, Sophia said, referencing the philosopher from her own future that Aga couldn't know. Discovered that philosophers had only interpreted the world when the point was to change it. But interpretation matters. Framework shapes action. Language enables organization. Your philosophy interprets reality in a way that enables baseline resistance. That's changing reality through interpretation rather than despite it. Will you continue helping me develop it? Aga asked. Yes, Sophia said. Not imposing burden and not directing toward a predetermined purpose, helping you strengthen the framework for the audience you're serving, teaching you to teach others, and providing pedagogical tools for spreading principles. Helping without controlling. Teaching without instrumentalizing. She thought about Siduri. About failure with a daughter who'd been created partly to solve the problem. About the burden imposed rather than the tools offered. About instrumentalization that damaged the relationship while failing to achieve the intended purpose. With Aga, she taught differently and helped the student develop what he sought, providing the tools he requested and supporting without controlling, leading to success rather than failure because the approach respected autonomy rather than imposing purpose. Next steps, Sophia said, pulling them back to practical development. You've presented to one baseline community, requests coming from others. You need to develop a scalable teaching approach. Can't personally teach every baseline community. Need to train other teachers. Create a curriculum others can use. Spread philosophy through the network rather than individual presentations. How do I do that? Aga asked. Document principles clearly, Sophia replied. Create examples that teachers can adapt. Develop responses to common questions that baseline audiences ask. Anticipate enhanced critiques without being defensive about them. Build a teaching framework that others can implement. Transform personal philosophy into a pedagogical system. That's what you do, Aga observed. Teaching teachers. Creating curricula. Building systems for spreading ideas. 52,000 years of practice, Sophia said. Apply to your philosophy. Not my philosophy. Yours. I'm helping you teach it and not teaching it for you. Subtle distinction. Important one. Your voice. Your framework. Your relationship with baseline communities. I'm teaching you how to scale that. Not replacing you. They work through the evening developing a teaching approach. Sophia is guiding with millennia of pedagogical experience. Aga, articulating with knowledge of baseline needs, Sophia couldn't fully access it despite Immortal wisdom, a partnership between an Immortal teacher and a baseline student. Sophia is learning as much as teaching. Both developing frameworks that might resist consolidation she'd helped enable through intervention that created enhanced humans now dominating. Irony wasn't lost on either of them. Multiple locations across Mesopotamia. The following 3 weeks. The philosophy spread through baseline intellectual networks at a speed that even Sophia's expectations could not account for. Not because baseline populations processed information quickly, they didn't. But because the baseline dignity framework provided the language that humans had been seeking. Framework arriving at precisely the moment consolidation was making baseline marginalization undeniable. Lagash. Aga is teaching the second baseline community. 43 people assembled. Agricultural center where baseline farmers watched as enhanced administrators optimized irrigation systems they'd maintained for generations. Resentment building as traditional knowledge was dismissed as inferior to enhanced calculation. Your agricultural knowledge matters, Aga taught, adapting principles to the local context. Enhanced administrators calculate optimal irrigation mathematically. You understand land through generations of observation. Different approaches. Both valuable. Mathematics optimizes within frameworks. Experience questions whether frameworks account for the mathematical variables they miss. Different cognitive strengths. Partnership needs both. Baseline farmers nodding. Framework defending the worth of traditional knowledge despite mathematical optimization. Language saying, enhanced efficiency doesn't make your experience worthless. Different knowledge. Different value. Both necessary. Eridu. A student of Aga is teaching the third community. A young baseline scholar named Curry, who'd attended the original presentation. 28 years old. Trained by Aga in the teaching approach Sophia had helped develop. Now spreading philosophy independently. Consciousness determines worth, Curry taught, using examples Aga had refined. Enhanced humans process faster. But you think. Feel. Choose. Experience. Are aware. That fundamental status creates equal worth. You're not less valuable because you're less capable. Capability and worth are separate. Enhanced dominance doesn't prove enhanced superiority as beings. Proves enhanced superiority at optimization. Different thing. Baseline craftspeople responding. Framework defending dignity despite economic marginalization. Philosophy spreads through a network rather than a single teacher. Scaling exactly as Sophia had suggested. Uruk. Heron, citing baseline dignity in a merchant guild meeting. 51 years old. Skeptical of philosophy's practical impact. But finding language that demands political representation despite economic losses. Enhanced merchants control 73% of trade, Heron said to the mixed guild meeting. That's the economic reality we face. Superior processing speed produces superior commercial outcomes. But economic dominance doesn't justify political dominance. Democracy requires our representation despite enhanced efficiency. We acknowledge commercial failure and demand participation in governance. Both possible. Framework scholar Aga developed makes both claims legitimate. Enhanced merchants are dismissive but unable to deny baseline representation without explicitly violating partnership principles. Philosophy provides baseline populations with language that couldn't be easily countered without revealing a consolidation agenda. Nippur. Baseline administrator citing dignity framework in partnership council and defending baseline voting rights against an enhanced proposal for weighted voting based on capability. Governance legitimacy comes from consent, not optimization, the administrator argued, using Aga's second principle. Enhanced council members process complex governance faster. We acknowledge that. But democracy isn't about optimal outcomes. It's about legitimate governance through participation. Our consent is necessary for legitimacy, even if our processing is of inferior quality. Partnership principles require our representation regardless of capability differences. The vote maintained equal representation. Philosophy provides baseline populations with a principled defense against consolidation that humans couldn't dismiss as mere resentment. Pattern across communities. 3 weeks after Aga's initial presentation. 7 baseline communities teaching baseline dignity principles. 12 trained teachers are spreading the framework independently. Merchants citing philosophy in economic discussions. Administrators using language in political debates. Farmers defending traditional knowledge through the dignity framework. Craftspeople maintain worth despite enhanced efficiency. Philosophy is spreading and not preventing consolidation. Not convincing enhanced humans, but providing baseline populations with intellectual tools for resistance. Framework transforming scattered resentment into principled opposition. Language enabling organization around shared values rather than individual grievances. Enhanced humans noticed. Dismissed as expected and continued dominating economically as reality confirmed their superiority despite baseline dignity claims. But the organization was different from the complaint. Principled resistance was harder to dismiss than emotional resentment. The framework made baseline opposition more coherent, even if not more effective. Seeds planted. Growing across weeks that would become months, years, decades, centuries. Ideas that might not prevent immediate consolidation but would shape how baseline populations understood and resisted hierarchy across generations. Immortal timescale measuring impact that humans couldn't yet see. Sophia's residence, Uruk. Late evening, 3 weeks after initial teaching. Sophia sat alone in her teaching space, reflecting on success and failure measured across different relationships and different timescales. 3 weeks since Aga's first presentation. Philosophy is spreading through 7 baseline communities. 12 teachers trained. Principles are being cited in political debates and economic discussions, a framework resonating with baseline populations seeking language for dignity despite capability differences. Limited victory. Philosophy wouldn't prevent consolidation. Enhanced intellectuals had systematically dismantled Aga's arguments. Reality confirmed their dismissal daily, markets continued to reward capability, enhanced humans continued to dominate commerce, and consolidation accelerated. But baseline populations were organizing around shared principles rather than scattered resentments. We are reciting the dignity framework in political debates. They were defending their worth philosophically even as they lost economically. We are maintaining self-respect despite systematic marginalization. That mattered. Not enough to prevent what it resisted, but enough to shape how resistance manifested. How baseline populations understood their position. How they demanded justice despite the capability differences they couldn't overcome. Sophia thought about Siduri. About the daughter, created partly to solve the problem the immortal intervention had created about the bridge function being imposed rather than chosen. About the burden that had exhausted the hybrid population while failing to unite the populations it was meant to bridge. She'd failed with Siduri and had an instrumentalized relationship. Had imposed purpose rather than offering tools. Had expected daughter to naturally fulfill mediation role without fully considering what she was asking. Mother guilt compounding across decades of watching daughter struggle with the burden she hadn't chosen. With Aga, she'd succeeded. Had helped the student develop what he sought, had provided the tools he requested, had taught without imposing, and had guided without controlling. Student success occurs when teaching respects autonomy rather than directing toward a predetermined purpose. What made the difference? Siduri hadn't wanted the bridge function. Had been created to fulfill a role she hadn't chosen. An imposed burden from birth. Expected to mediate without being asked whether she wanted that exhausting position. Instrumentalized from inception. Aga had wanted philosophy and had sought a framework for defending dignity, and had requested teaching. Had needed intellectual tools for articulating intuitions he already felt. Students chose what the teacher offered rather than being directed toward what the teacher needed. Fundamental difference. Imposition versus invitation. Burden versus tools. Control versus autonomy. Sophia had learned this lesson through failure with her daughter before applying it to success with a student. The teaching approach was refined through recognizing what went wrong with Siduri. Understanding that successful teaching required respecting what students wanted rather than directing them toward what teachers needed. 52,000 years old. Still learning from mistakes and still growing through failure. Still discovering that wisdom required questioning assumptions she'd operated under for millennia. She thought specifically about the baseline dignity philosophy, about what it achieved and what it didn't. Didn't prevent consolidation. Enhanced humans were right that capability determined economic outcomes. Markets rewarded processing speed. Biology created advantages that compounded across time. Philosophy couldn't change the reality that enhanced superiority produced enhanced dominance. Didn't convince enhanced humans. Their dismissal was valid from a capability perspective. Consciousness hierarchy made sense to optimizers. Informed consent logic was sound. Claims about baseline unique strengths were unsupported by measurable evidence. Philosophy failed by the standards that intellectuals applied to it. But philosophy provided baseline populations with a resistance framework. With language for maintaining dignity. With principles for organizing around. With a framework that separated capability from worth. With tools for demanding justice despite the biological reality that made justice difficult. That was a victory by a different measurement. Not a philosophical victory in academic debate. Political victory in practical organization. Not changing what enhanced intellectuals believed, but changing what baseline populations could articulate about their own worth. Limited victory. But victory nonetheless. Sophia considered a longer timeline. Ideas planted in 2850 BCE would grow across decades, centuries, and millennia. Baseline populations that cite Aga's principles would develop resistance frameworks that build on his foundations. Philosophy passed down through generations would shape how humans understood capability, worth, dignity, and democracy over thousands of years. She wouldn't see most of that impact. Aga wouldn't see any of it. But an immortal perspective measured success across timescales that transcended individual lifetimes. Seeds for later. No solutions for now. Ideas that would matter when planters were dust, and teachers were memories. That was teaching success by immortal standards. Not an immediate change. Long-term frameworks shaping thought across generations. Philosophy that didn't prevent consolidation in 2850 BCE but might influence how humans resisted or accommodated hierarchy in 2500 BCE, 2000 BCE, 1500 BCE, and beyond. Sophia thought about her role. An immortal teacher helping a baseline student develop philosophy, resisting the consolidation enabled by immortal intervention. Irony was thick. She'd helped create enhanced humans by teaching, enabling Talia's enhancement program. Now helping create philosophical resistance to the dominance that those enhanced humans pursued. Helping with problems she'd created. Trying to mitigate the consequences of the intervention she'd participated in. Never solving. Always managing. Attempting to build justice within systems whose capabilities kept undermining. Limited role. But necessary. Teaching resistance even when resistance couldn't prevent what it opposed. Providing tools even when tools weren't sufficient. Helping students develop frameworks that matter over time, even if they don't change immediate outcomes. Tomorrow, she would continue teaching a mixed class. Would watch enhanced students optimize instantly. Would watch Aga question frameworks they accepted. Would guide without imposing. Would teach without instrumentalizing. It would help without controlling. Learning from failure and growing through recognition. Understanding that successful teaching requires offering tools rather than imposing burdens. That students flourished when they wanted what teachers provided rather than when teachers directed them toward predetermined purposes. 52,000 years of teaching. Still learning, still growing, and still discovering that wisdom requires admitting mistakes and adjusting approaches accordingly. Sophia extinguished lamps, preparing for rest. 3 weeks since philosophy began spreading. Decades until the complete impact manifests. Centuries until the framework matured fully. Millennia until ideas seeded now reached complete expression. Immortal timeline measuring success that humans experienced as a distant future, but immortals recognized as approaching the present. Seeds were planted carefully. Growing slowly and mattering eventually. Limited victory over immediate consolidation. Significant victory over a longer timeline. Both are true simultaneously. Both are valuable despite tension between them. Both are necessary for partnership survival even when the partnership seemed to be failing by shorter measurements. Philosophy spreading. Resistance organizing. Baseline dignity defended. Enhanced consolidation continuing. All happening simultaneously. All part of a pattern that would take centuries to resolve into clarity that humans could recognize. Teaching success. Despite immediate limitations. Because of a longer timeline. Through an approach that respected autonomy rather than imposing purpose. Sophia fell asleep thinking about Aga and Saduri. Student flourishing. Daughter struggling. Both teaching her about teaching. Both showed that success required respecting learners' wants rather than directing them toward teachers' needs. Lessons learned late and applied forward. Growing through failure and teaching differently. Understanding finally what 52,000 years should have taught earlier, that wisdom required learning from mistakes rather than defending against recognition of error. Hidden chamber, beneath Uruk temple. 2 weeks after Aga's public lecture. The chamber existed in spaces between spaces, an architectural anomaly that Zephyrus had built centuries earlier for purposes most humans would never comprehend, a quantum-stabilized room that defied standard physics to provide a secure location for preserving truths dangerous to reveal but essential to remember. Damon of Uruk worked alone, as he preferred, surrounded by tablets that told a story most immortals wished forgotten, and most humans hadn't discovered yet. Evidence of manipulation spanning 6 millennia. Documentation of hidden guidance, genetic modification, controlled development, and the entire architecture of deception that produced civilization from refugees' desperate intervention. 31 years ago, he'd been questioner, investigator gathering evidence to expose an immortal presence, preparing to publish findings that would trigger immediate revelation, convinced that truth mattered more than timing, that humans deserved honesty regardless of readiness. Then Enoch had shown him a complete picture. Had revealed not just manipulation but refugee trauma driving it, and had explained not just deception but the extinction timeline they'd prevented. Had offered not suppression but covenant, join order, preserve evidence while providing context, prepare humanity for revelation rather than triggering catastrophic disclosure before either species could survive the truth. Damon had accepted and had transformed from a questioner gathering evidence for condemnation into an order member preserving evidence for comprehensive judgment, and had spent 3 decades documenting immortal intervention while building a context that would make revelation survivable rather than catastrophic. Tonight, he worked on the newest preservation project, Aga's philosophy. 4 principles of human dignity spread across clay tablets before him, each word carefully copied from a public lecture Damon had attended specifically to document. A baseline scholar developing a sophisticated resistance philosophy without immortal guidance, without enhanced cognition, through pure human reasoning about what dignity meant when biology refused to cooperate with ethical commitments. First principle, consciousness determines worth, not capability. Aga argues that one deserves dignity regardless of processing speed, memory capacity, or physical strength. That moral value emerged from awareness rather than advantage. Second principle, democracy requires representation, not optimization. Claiming partnership needed voices rather than efficiency, participation rather than results, process that served everyone adequately rather than some excellently. Third principle, optimization is not wisdom. asserting that fastest calculation, strongest solution, most efficient outcome might miss variables optimization metrics that can't be measured, human dignity, social cohesion, ethical necessity. Fourth principle, different strengths matter differently. Recognizing enhanced advantages without conceding those advantages justified hierarchy. Different capabilities serve different purposes, baseline wisdom complemented enhanced cognition, and partnership required both rather than privileging one. Brilliant. Sophisticated. Dangerous. Damon encoded copies in multiple formats, surface text for immediate readers, deep structure for future scholars with mathematics to decode, quantum preservation for archives that would survive geological time. Each encoding method ensured Aga's philosophy persisted, whether the current civilization survived or collapsed, whether partnership succeeded or failed, whether baseline dignity remained an aspirational principle or became a historical curiosity about resistance that tried and lost. This survives, Damon whispered to the empty chamber, voice carrying conviction his father Enoch had taught him. When humans learn what immortals are, when enhanced consolidation seems inevitable, when biological hierarchy feels natural, they'll need Aga's voice saying capability doesn't determine worth. They'll need a baseline philosophy proving wisdom emerged without enhancement. They'll need evidence showing resistance wasn't futile even if unsuccessful. Footsteps on quantum-stabilized stairs. Enhanced grace announcing the visitor before confirming the identity. Methuselah entered through a doorway that appeared as a solid wall to observers without quantum-attuned perception. Order leader. Enoch's son. Damon's coordinator. Enhanced human carrying burden of an institution built by a baseline visionary who died believing the covenant would outlast him. Aga's work? Methuselah asked, studying tablets with enhanced cognition that process not just words but implications, connections, and consequences. Fourth major preservation this month, Damon continued encoding, each symbol carrying the weight of preparation for a revelation he wouldn't live to witness, but would serve nonetheless. Baseline humans developing philosophy of resistance, that's revolution. Not a military coup, not a political uprising, but an intellectual framework asserting dignity despite biological disadvantages. Our job isn't suppressing it. Our job is ensuring it survives long enough to matter. The Immortals know this philosophy threatens consolidation? Methuselah's voice carried careful neutrality, neither approval nor concern, just a question seeking information. Sophia knows. She's the one teaching him. Damon smiled slightly, expression mixing respect and irony. That's how you know it's good philosophy, when even beings whose advantages it threatens recognize its necessity, when the immortal who could suppress instead supports. When the teacher enables the student to develop arguments that challenge the teacher's own position. Methuselah circled the work table, enhanced eyes scanning encoded tablets with facility that revealed meanings Damon couldn't hide even if he'd wanted to. Father built this order believing humans could hold complexity that we could help immortals stay hidden while preparing humanity for revelation. That documentation served both secrecy and eventual disclosure simultaneously. Aga's work tests that belief. How so? Damon paused encoding, giving the coordinator full attention as required by order protocols when leadership spoke. Because spreading baseline dignity philosophy accelerates the consolidation it resists. Methuselah's voice carried the weight of someone inheriting a burden without choosing it, leading the organization toward purposes he supported without fully comprehending. Enhanced humans hearing these arguments push back harder. We're documenting resistance that creates backlash, requiring more documentation. We're preserving philosophy that provokes exactly the consolidation philosophy warns against. He gestured to tablets, each one capturing Aga's words while potentially triggering an enhanced response that made those words prophetically accurate. That's Covenant's paradox, preparing for revelation by managing pressures that make revelation inevitable. Documenting consolidation while recognizing that documentation might accelerate what it records. Preserving resistance, knowing preservation might doom resistance to failure by making the threat visible to those resisted. Father knew that paradox, Damon said quietly, conviction replacing doubt. That's why he built bridges instead of walls. We don't stop consolidation, we document it honestly. We don't suppress enhanced frustration, we understand it completely. We don't prevent baseline resistance, we preserve it permanently. When revelation comes, both sides need to see their arguments were heard, positions documented, logic comprehended, even when conclusions were resisted. He sealed the encoded tablet in quantum storage, where molecular bonds would preserve the information until the universe's heat death rendered preservation meaningless. Enhanced humans will read this someday and understand baseline philosophy wasn't ignorance but wisdom. Baseline humans will read this and know their resistance was documented, remembered, deemed worthy of preservation despite, because of, its ultimate success or failure. Immortals will read this and see that humans developed sophisticated ethics without enhancement, proving cognitive advantages weren't required for moral reasoning. And if consolidation succeeds? Methuselah asked. If Aga's philosophy fails and enhanced humans dominate despite baseline resistance? If biological hierarchy becomes a political reality despite ethical arguments asserting that capability shouldn't determine authority? Then these tablets prove baseline humans tried. Damon's voice carried the certainty his father had taught, the conviction that documentation mattered whether attempts succeeded or failed. Prove they developed sophisticated philosophy despite cognitive disadvantages. Prove they earned dignity through wisdom rather than waiting for capability to grant it. Prove partnership was an option, was attempted, was believed possible by beings with every reason to accept biological determinism, but chose ethical resistance instead. He moved to the next tablet, continuing preservation work that would consume weeks of careful encoding. That documentation matters whether the partnership succeeds or fails. Matters more if it fails, because failure requires explanation, requires evidence showing what was tried, what was lost, why both mattered, that beings enough kept trying despite odds suggesting futility. Methuselah watched him work, enhanced cognition processing, not just current preservation, but future implications, revelation scenarios, judgment possibilities. Father used to say documentation was intervention. That recording wasn't passive observation but active participation in shaping how truth would be understood when truth could finally be spoken aloud. He was right. Damon sealed another tablet. Aga speaks. I encode. You coordinate. We preserve. And someday, centuries hence, when revelation transforms encoded history into public knowledge, humans will see their own development documented honestly. We'll see enhanced consolidation approached. We'll see baseline resistance developed. We'll see immortals watching, helping, and harming simultaneously. We'll judge everything knowing the complete context. Will they judge us guilty? Methuselah's question carried the weight of someone who'd inherited an institution without choosing a burden, who'd serve a covenant unto death without knowing whether service justified sacrifice. Probably. Damon's honesty felt like relief, like freedom from pretending documentation guaranteed exoneration. Enhanced humans will see we documented their consolidation while doing little to prevent it. Baseline humans will see we preserved their resistance while watching it fail. Immortals will see we prepared for the revelation while maintaining deception. Everyone will see we held complexity while serving purposes. They'll question. He looked up from encoding, meeting Methuselah's ancient young eyes with his merely human gaze. But they'll see the truth. They'll see completely. They'll see we tried maintaining both, secrecy and preparation, documentation and management, preservation and context. Whether that trying justifies methods remains for future judgment. What matters now is ensuring the future has a complete record for making that judgment informed rather than ignorant. The Order preserved. Damon sealed Aga's tablets in quantum storage, where they'll survive for millennia. Methuselah questioned whether spreading baseline dignity philosophy accelerates the consolidation it resists. Enhanced humans hearing these arguments will push back harder. We're documenting resistance that creates the backlash requiring more documentation. That's the Covenant's paradox, Damon replied. Preparing for revelation by managing the pressures that make revelation inevitable. The Order preserves everything. Philosophy that might fail. Resistance that might provoke harsher consolidation. Arguments that might prove insufficient when the biological hierarchy seems natural. Documentation doesn't guarantee success. It just ensures failure is understood completely. In Chapter 6, Enoch's prophecies spread, philosophy becomes pattern recognition. 15 years since scholars began decoding Enoch's texts. 15 years of questions accelerating toward conclusions. Humans are asking whether watchers are a myth or a memory. Whether biological advantages have explanations hidden in plain sight. The prophecies aren't revealing divine truth. They're exposing genetic intervention disguised as mythology. And across 17 regions, the Enochian Order manages premature exposures, providing context for discoveries while preventing catastrophic confrontations. Nyx's probability models incorporate data that most immortals don't know exists. Order reports from embedded observers. Truth is spreading faster than the Order can contain. Not catastrophically. Just inevitably. Some secrets become too heavy to keep. Join me for Chapter 6, available now, link in the description. If you believe truth emergence challenges institutional control, please subscribe and share with historians.